recording this meeting so that folks that weren't able to join us live can access it. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniela Garcia Moreno. I'm a sustainability planner with the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments in NEMCOG. And NEMCOG is the administrator for the Northern Middlesex Stormwater Collaborative. I'm joined today by Emily Scerbo and Cassandra LaRochelle. Emily is the stormwater practice leader with Tighe & Bond, and Cassandra is a project manager and MS4 technical specialist with Tighe & Bond. And they'll be leading us through the MS4 Good Housekeeping training today. So thank you all for joining us. In some housekeeping, before we get into the housekeeping, if you are comfortable with having your camera on, it's always encouraged. Makes this, I think, a more collaborative and interactive space. Throughout the presentation, Emily and Cassandra will encourage questions, and I'll be monitoring the chat, and we'll be sure to interrupt with your questions throughout the presentation. So please feel free to use the raise hand function or the chat as you have thoughts and like to interact with the presenters. At this point, I'll hand it over to Emily and Cassandra, and they'll kick us off with the Good Housekeeping training.
Thank you so much. And just for those of you that we haven't met yet, I'm Cassandra, and this is Emily, just so that you have the differentiation there. But thank you so much for joining us. Today, we will be talking through both the illicit discharge detection and elimination and municipal good housekeeping programs. We want to make sure that you are hitting that permit year 5 annual employee training box as well in the annual report. So please remember to use that sign-in link that Daniela sent in the chat. Other items we'll be touching on are pollution prevention within municipal good housekeeping and municipal operations, and then we'll be taking a look ahead a few months at the annual report that is due at the end of September this year. The first few slides, I'm sure you are all familiar with the program at this point, so I'll jump through pretty quickly, but let me know if you have any questions as I go. So as you're aware, the permit is broken out into those 6 minimum control measures with the added bonus of the TMDLs and impaired water body requirements. And today we will be covering our MCM 3 and 6 training requirement. So to kick us off with the IDDE program, we're going to be talking about how to identify illicit discharges and some specific examples for catchment investigations and wet weather screening. So to the basics of the illicit discharges, really it's anything that discharges to the drainage system, to the MS4, that is not composed entirely of stormwater. So there are some indirect discharges that are more overland or via groundwater. There can be piped direct connections, such as actual sewer connections or, laundry, things of that nature. The exception there are the allowable non-stormwater discharges, flows from firefighting, sort of routine water system operations and maintenance with flushing, dechlorinated swimming pool water, and others listed here. What we really want to dig into is, if you're out in the field, what are you seeing, and how are you identifying an illicit discharge or an illicit connection? Some of the key indicators that we're going to be talking about is if there's an odor. It can run the gamut if you have like a sewer odor or something along those lines. There can be color in the water if it's more turbid, or if there are floatables, and we're not talking about just trash and garbage there. If there's floatables, clear indicator of an illicit discharge in the drainage system. And if you are seeing something that might be an indicator, it should be reported, and depending on the level of risk to public health and safety, there's different methods and different ways that you should be reporting this for what the illicit discharge is and the impact it might have. Reporting is critical. Municipalities can be audited, So EPA, even in the annual reports every year, EPA wants to know when the illicit discharge was found, what the response was, when it was eliminated, and how you confirmed that it was truly fixed. And due to the wide range of illicit discharges, the appropriate authorities, internal in your municipality and external as well, can vary. So we didn't want to try to cover every scenario here, but your illicit discharge, your IDDE plan, the written plan, should have a statement of responsibility that outlines the appropriate response procedures for different types of illicit discharges within your community. So that is our high level slides there about the background. And right now, this is the framework of the illicit discharge detection and elimination program. It follows the framework that is set out in the general permit. And right now we are nearing the end of permit year 5. And we're in the middle of catchment investigations and mapping updates of your GIS and wet weather screening as well of outfalls.
Should we pause to see if there's questions?
Absolutely. Please let us know if you have any questions at this point. The last thing we want is to talk at you for an hour. Feel free to drop questions in the chat too, and we can pause at any time to address. Okay, hearing none at this point, wanted to get into the background of catchment investigations. And EPA's catchment investigation program is a 2-part program. It consists of manhole inspections during dry weather, and then also outfall sampling during wet weather. To start from the beginning, to define catchment, it's basically the land area that drains to an individual outfall or interconnection. And we are making observations, sampling, and looking in drainage structures during dry weather to determine if there is an illicit discharge, to try to basically hunt down the source of that illicit discharge located between 2 structures to determine where the illicit connection might be coming from and proceed to eliminate it. So EPA's MS4 requirement is that all catchments with junction structures must be investigated during dry weather, no matter what. So you have to go into the system upstream of the outfall and open key junction structures. And I will define junction and key junction shortly. But for catchments that don't have any junction structures, if you have a catch basin that crosses the street and outlets, the dry weather screening effort completed at the outfall does meet that sampling requirement, the manhole inspection requirement. Now, as promised, some background on the junction and key junction manhole definitions. So junction manholes are essentially a structure with more than one pipe entering the structure, unless it is from a private storm drain or a single catch basin. In that case, it wouldn't trigger it into being a junction manhole. And a key junction manhole is a junction structure that can represent one or more junction structures. So really what this means is we look for those structures that have multiple inlets, identify that as a junction structure, and try to make the determination on which one is the best one to open, so that if there is dry weather flow, you can best track that flow up into the system. And so you can have more than one key junction structure, and you can have, I was going to say it might not be a manhole. So I'm going to use those terms interchangeably here. Key junction manhole, key junction structure. Sometimes they're catch basins. It just depends on how the network of piping is mapped. And this is a quick graphic to kind of help visualize the junction and key junction manholes. In this sketch, the green, all of the circles are representative of manholes. And the green ones are ones that were identified as junction manholes, junction structures, because there's more than one inlet into that structure. Again, not representing a single catch basin. So the bottom right there, since it's just 2 individual catch basins entering that manhole, that does not constitute a junction manhole. Okay. When you are going into the system and opening the junction structures, there are a few items that you have to tackle while you're there. So ultimately, you are looking for evidence of dry weather flow, which could be an indicator of an illicit discharge or an illicit connection. And you are screening for visual or olfactory evidence of an illicit discharge. Of course, the sort of more obvious ones is if you're seeing toilet paper, if you're seeing any of those floatables, that's a clear indicator there. But the color, the turbidity, other visual or olfactory evidence. And then we're also sampling if dry weather flow is present. There are test kits and colorimeters that we're using to sample for surfactants or detergents, chlorine and ammonia. And then per the permit, we are comparing to the benchmarks that EPA has set forth, which are at the bottom of the screen there, for each of those parameters to see if the combination of those three might constitute an illicit source of the flow. So this slide demonstrates basically the process that you can follow to complete the catchment investigations. So for a mapped network that goes to a specific outfall, you would identify your junction structures and your key junction structures, and you open up the most downstream key junction structure and inspect for the evidence of illicit connection. And then you start to work your way upstream, and you want to open every key junction structure within the catchment area. And you can, as you are basically tracing down the flow in between two structures, it may be that you'll have to make a field decision for whether another junction structure or another manhole gets opened as part of that investigation to try to isolate the source between two structures. I'm going to pause again here if there are any questions on the manhole. Before I pause here, the last note, once you are able to isolate any flow, dry weather flow that has indicators of an illicit discharge between two structures, you would then need to move forward with the next step of confirming the source, whether if it's a house connection that shouldn't be there, and then moving forward to eliminate it. So you can use dye testing, CCTV, or other methods to try to narrow it down even more specifically from between two structures.
Is it worth mentioning now? It's up on camera. We are typically going downstream to upstream a lot of times because mapping can be, it's not perfect at this point. So we find it's easier to trace that way. But a lot of times when maybe mapping is more, refined, you can go from the top of the catchment down, and sometimes that can be more efficient if say higher up in the catchment, so like say upstream in that catchment area, you identify an illicit discharge, you could stop looking downstream because you've already found something. You would maybe only hit the key junction manholes at that point, looking for like order of magnitude increases or decreases at that point, and then you're doing work and you would have to revisit that catchment. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah, so people have different preferences how they like to tackle the catchment area.
Any questions on that at this point? All right, so part 2 of the overall catchment investigation program is wet weather outfall investigations. And how the permit defines this requirement is all outfalls that are located within a catchment that has at least one system vulnerability factor, an SVF, essentially an indicator that there might be a higher chance of a sewer input in that catchment area to the drainage system. For all of those catchment areas that have one or more SVF, you do have to complete the wet weather sampling. So the SVFs are listed there for your information, and that's something that gets screened before going out into the field for the wet weather. So you can You don't have to go to every outfall for wet weather like you did in dry weather. When you are going out to do the sampling effort, EPA and the general permit does not specifically call out a rainfall event, the depth or the duration, but they do want sufficient depth or intensity so that there is an active stormwater discharge occurring. And they recommend sampling in the spring when groundwater levels are high, but also to avoid the first flush, so you're not getting elevated levels that you wouldn't really normally see during a rainstorm coming off of the roadway. And for the actual sampling effort when you're there, the procedure and the sampling requirements and the laboratory sampling, it's all the same as you have to do at that outfall for dry weather. So there's no changes there. You just have a lot of extra rain gear. Any questions on wet weather? Okay. Okay, so I want to go through a couple of examples, and these streets might be familiar to a few of you, so thank you for allowing us to use your examples. With a couple of what would you do scenarios here. So this is a larger catchment area, a couple of streets, and those the manholes in red were assigned as key junction manholes due to the multiple inlets going to them. So because they were identified in red, we would have to open each of those structures, or sorry, identified as key junctions. So the question to you, which hopefully Emily's little hint came a little early, which key junction structure would you open first? And please just drop your answer in the chat. So you can either open the most downstream one, key junction manhole number 1, or the middle, if you will, key junction structure number 2, or the most upstream key junction number 3, or wink, wink, number 1 or number 3. So answer D. Any thoughts?
There's no penalty for wrong guesses.
It's true. And unfortunately, I don't have candy to throw at you because we're not in person if you get it right, but definitely would appreciate any thoughts in the chats there about what you would do if you were in the field here.
Celia raised 3 fingers.
All right, we have a guess for 1. D.
Awesome.
Cool. Anybody? A few more answers? Another D. All right.
Excellent.
Seems like we have a few D's coming in.
Yes, that is right. There's almost no wrong answer here. You can start at either the most downstream or the most upstream key junction structure. It's really how you prefer to take the approach. Just remember that all of those key junction structures identified should be opened, just in case there's some flow that might not be making it all the way through the system to the far ends. Awesome, thank you. I have managed to lose my mouse, so I'm going to just try to click. Okay. Goodness. Okay, so in this scenario, each of the key junction structures was opened. It was screened for dry weather flow and indicators of an illicit discharge. No flow was found, no indicators were found, so this portion of the catchment investigations can be considered complete. It was a pretty simple one, all things considered. We did also take the opportunity to try to identify any unknown pipes in the mapping or update the GIS while we were out there and had structures open, because the other kind of hand of the catchment investigations that EPA does want to see continued updates of the mapping for by year. I think the schedules kind of coincide that as catchment investigations complete, the GIS mapping should be as complete as possible as well. So we took a last look at as well how we have been approaching the catchment investigations to date. We will also take a look at the most upstream terminal structures at the limits of the catchment area, like the headwaters of the catchment, just to confirm that there's no additional unmapped drainage that would expand the catchment. So for example, in this situation, we also were able to figure out some connectivity of the catch basin there, that it actually did connect into the catchment. All right, so scenario 1. Situation 2 ended up being a little bit more complicated, a little bit bigger. There's more streets involved. So in this situation, excuse me, the field crew opened up the most downstream structure. Again, that's how we have chosen so far to implement the procedure. And they did find that there was flow coming from both pipes, both inlet pipes. And the flow from the left side, if you will, of key junction manhole number 1 did have elevated in situ test results compared to EPA's benchmarks, which are there on the screen on the right. So we did trace that flow upstream. And we sampled again upstream. There were no additional junction structures identified on the street, so we sort of in the field selected one to see if we could find an increase or a decrease in those water quality levels. So the results here were lower, as you can see in the screen there, for ammonia, chlorine, and surfactants. And looking for another round of input here about what do you think? Does the pipe segment have as affected illicit discharge based on the information that we have available to us right now with those sample results?
Seems hard.
It is hard, but I'll give you some extra input after. And I will say this is, I mean, these are the questions that we're asking every day after the catchment investigations is, what are the sample results looking like? What is the combination? Is it really looking like an illicit discharge or some low-lying level of, maybe somebody washed their car upstream, and that's okay.
All right, so you're looking for people to pick
Yes,
A or B.
looking at A or B, 50-50 chance. So with low levels of, or no levels of ammonia,
All right, so we
EPA,
have 1 guess for B.
yep, chlorine surfactants at benchmark.
We have 1A. Okay. We have a B.
More, love it. Okay. So we are saying no, that this is not indicative of an illicit discharge. While there are still some elevated results, the general permit dictates that if there isn't additional visual or olfactory evidence of an illicit discharge, it really does take a combination of 3 parameters to constitute a likely sewer input. So it's at the bottom there. It takes all 3 parameters being elevated. And I'll give you another hint. Remember that part. It takes the combo of 3. I may or may not have more poll questions coming for you.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean nothing's happening there either. It's
That's
just
true.
not considered likely sewer input. And those are the key words right there.
Exactly. All right. So to reorient you again, we had flow at both inlet pipes. We went down the left side from junction manhole number 1. Now I'm going to take you down the right side. Okay, so we traced the flow upstream. For the right branch, we sampled at the next upstream key junction structure, number 2 there. And this structure also had flow from multiple inlets. So both were sampled. Flow from the left had results that were below benchmarks. And again, because of what we've talked about, like that was considered to be complete at that time. For the results from the right, they're a little bit more elevated still, and it's similar to the downstream results. So it's more likely that the flow that had the hits would have been coming from that branch. So to reorient you again, we just continued upstream to the next junction structure, going to number 3. And this next slide covers kind of a bigger area, so bear with me. And if you have questions about any areas that I'm talking about, please let me know. So we opened the next key junction structure, number 3, And again, both inlet had flow. As you can see in the test kit results, the combination of parameters doesn't meet the likely sewer input indicators, where the combo. So we continued to trace the flow upstream, and the last step is to open the remaining key junction structures. So key junction manhole number 4 did have the combination of results that, again, it doesn't exactly meet EPA's criteria for the likely sewer input. And then going up towards key junction manhole number 5, which is offset a little bit, there was no flow. So that helps you kind of narrow down the flow to where it might be coming from. It's, it's possible it could be capturing some stream flow. It could be capturing low levels of things happening in the neighborhood. It's a big neighborhood and it's capturing a lot of drainage and runoff. The other thing I want to note, you may have noticed throughout this case study that there are low levels of surfactants detected in pretty much all of the structures. In case you haven't seen it, the surfactants test kit, it's a visual color wheel and it can be somewhat subjective. So often we'll take a conservative approach of rounding up, if you will, to the nearest 0.25 milligrams per liter, if the color appears to be kind of in between. So I'm guessing that is the case in a lot of these structures, is that it's kind of in between, but it's not perfectly clear. So we want to be conservative and capture that information with the next step, which is 0.25 milligrams per liter, which is EPA's benchmark. Also in coastal communities, there is an additional salinity interference that occurs with this specific test kit. And it can cause false positives if there's a salinity, a higher salinity level. So it's really just extra cause to me to consider all 3 of EPA screening criteria with the surfactants, the ammonia, and the chlorine when we are evaluating whether there might be an illicit discharge present.
It's like we have a question from Leah.
Yes,
Leah, do you
please.
want to unmute?
So going back to the scenario 1, even though it didn't have the 3 parameters that you're looking for, the fact that at the furthest upstream area had an unknown connection, that wouldn't the next scenario, but the first type, the one on the left.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
the fact that at the very end of that there's an unknown connection, that wouldn't be a concern, even though you're not meeting the 3 parameters.
It is definitely something that we're trying to hunt down. And unfortunately, I don't have a real answer of, it looks like we in the field did not figure that out for this street. That you're correct. That is something that we would want to figure out with the overall mapping here. See if I can scroll the right way. It does go to a cul-de-sac, so there is a chance that it could connect through, and that is something that we'd want to verify before we consider the whole thing complete.
Right.
Yes.
Because if it's an illicit connection, what gets put into that could change any day. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point.
Yeah, so you wouldn't be considering that catchment quote unquote complete because we have an unmapped pipe.
Right.
Yeah.
And I will say in this community, there are a lot of like sump pump or roof leader connections. So it's always possible that like a house is connected, which again is something that you would want to know what was connected to that. If it was laundry or sewer, I guess laundry, you might not see evidence of illicit discharge at that time, but there probably would be some sort of an indicator.
Yeah, those like intermittent individual home connections that can either be a sump pump, a French drain, or whatever. They're really tricky. Because if it's clean, uncontaminated pumped groundwater, that's fine. If it becomes contaminated, it's a problem, and it's just catching that one moment where it is contaminated. Like we found instances where clearly it was connected to maybe like a basement sink, and there washing paint.
Hmm.
And we
Yeah,
saw
right.
the paint, so it was like, yes, we found it.
Right, yeah.
If they had not dumped paint within the past week, we may not have noticed that that was a problem.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions on these scenarios so far? Apologies for the screen flipping.
Yeah, and these scenarios where you have like all these just like low level slight benchmark exceedances are difficult. Like
Yeah.
we very rarely come up with like something very obvious. It's a lot of this gray area.
Yeah.
Find your way back.
Yes, I think I'm here. Okay, and for our last scenario, it's a little bit of a continued gray area, but I thought it was worth kind of highlighting. So this is just a simpler, if you will, drainage area in a cul-de-sac. And I'm going to ask a poll question here again. Does this catchment require manhole inspections or wet weather screening? So are manhole inspections required? Like, are there junction structures based on what you know so far? Are there manholes with multiple inlets going to it? Okay. A. If not, we'd be going with B here, that no manhole inspections are required. Wet weather screening is required if there's an SPF, or B and C, that no manhole inspections are required because there are no junction structures. And wet weather is required if there's an SVF. Thoughts here? Get a few responses in the chat. B. Any other ideas of whether manhole inspections are required or wet weather? Okay, I have a B, and B is right, and C is also right. So there's no junction structures because there's only one drain pipe entering each of the structures in the mapping. Because of that, because there's no junction structures in the catchment, dry weather screening at the outfall does meet that manhole inspection requirement. But the last check is whether this neighborhood has a system vulnerability factor that would require wet weather screening. And when we were on site in this neighborhood for actually a non-MS4 project, we were doing a condition assessment of pipes with our quick view zoom camera, and we were seeing pretty significant orange brown sludge buildup, if you will, at the pipe joints. So this was coupled with some olfactory evidence, a bit of a smell at the ground level that was present during the inspection. So because of this, what we were seeing in the pipe and what we were smelling above ground, we did want to complete some additional follow-up investigations. So in this scenario, we returned to the street to complete in situ water quality screening, of the structures. When we did return, the smell at the street level was significantly reduced, but the water quality results that were pulled from the sump did support the thought that there might be something going on in the area. But as I mentioned, the results were taken from the sump. So there was no flow present during the inspection. So we just took a grab sample of the water in the sump. And so with my last poll, I promise, what would you do in this situation? Would you do nothing because the results are not indicative of a sanitary sewer input? Would you send an enforcement letter? Or would you come back again to sample when there's actually dry weather flow? I'm seeing a bunch of C's. Awesome. That is correct. So the samples taken from the sump did have elevated levels. So answer A was correct, incorrect, my goodness. And before getting to enforcement, the source of the suspected illicit discharge should be isolated and confirmed. So we chose to return to the site because we were unsure of the source at this point, and we wanted to complete additional water quality analysis. You can also, as additional follow-up, complete more CCTV or do dye testing. When we returned, dry weather flow was present. So we completed sort of the typical suite of catchment investigations, the ammonia, chlorine, and surfactants. And we also took a bacteria sample. It's not a MS4 requirement, but we did kind of want to get that extra information about the actual flow in terms of bacteria. Again, at the time, there was no olfactory evidence of an illicit discharge. The results from all of this in situ and lab sampling supported that there was not an illicit discharge. And we also completed wet weather sampling at the outfall, which again, further supported that there wasn't a rain-induced surcharging situation or sanitary sewer input. So our current assumption in this scenario is that there was a buildup of like naturally occurring iron ochre, iron bacteria, and that it could have been just slowly over time building up in the pipe, coming in through the pipe joints of the drain. So that is the end of my polls, my catchment investigation scenarios. Any questions on illicit discharges or the IDD program as a whole, different scenarios you may have encountered in the field? Okay. All right. Thank you. How did I do?
Your time is excellent.
All right, we're gonna flip over to Emily
All
here.
All right. Hold on, I'm gonna shrink the chat for a minute. Hold on, get situated. Okay. Okay.
Do you want me to click or do you?
You can click. That'd
Okay.
be great. Okay. So I'm going to talk a bit about municipal good housekeeping. Because we've gone through this material with you all kind of every year for a while, I think there's a lot to review. We won't go through everything, but we're going to highlight some certain parts of this section of the program. Go ahead. So just to start, really big picture. So the municipal good housekeeping requirements has a goal of preventing or reducing pollutant runoff and protecting water quality from municipal operations. So it does get muddy in the MS4 program between what you need to do to maintain your drainage system, and that is important, but really the overarching goal is still more about water quality. So it's just something to keep in mind. So your major requirement under this section, MCM 6 here, is to create your operation and maintenance program, that written plan that was due in permit year 2. So in that plan, you should have written O&M procedures for municipal activities, including some standard operating procedures. And you should have an inventory of your municipal facilities and your vehicles and have an understanding of what's going on all of those sites and making the connection with SOPs. And so one thing EPA has been asking in annual reports is if that's been updated. I think it's worthwhile if you haven't done this already, or if you're not doing it annually, to go through and just make sure your inventory of facilities hasn't changed. Like, are all those properties still accurate and under municipal ownership? Do you know what's happening on the sites? Has anything changed? Have you added any kind of like oil storage, or, make sure you've got all the applicable SOPs connected with each facility, throw an updated vehicle inventory into the plan, and then you can say that that's been updated. This program requires all of that record keeping and putting it into the annual report, as I mentioned, and then regular employee training, which we're doing today. It doesn't specifically say annual training, just as regular. So in addition to the O&M plan, some municipalities, actually, I would say most municipalities, are also required to develop stormwater pollution prevention plans for individual facilities. So this is required for anything like a maintenance garage, public works yards, transfer stations, and other waste handling facilities where pollutants are exposed to stormwater. So that's an important piece of it. The SWIP is not required if one of those sites already has an individual NIFTY's permit for industrial activities. So that kind of comes into play for like a transfer station or a wastewater treatment facility. And then just want to mention that quarterly site inspections are required. We're not really going to go into this in depth, but EPA is looking for you to be doing those, have that documented 4 times a year. They're asking on the annual report how many SWIP inspections happened, and one of those inspections should happen during a rainstorm. I feel like everyone puts off that rainy day inspection till the end. So you've got another, is there a week left? Yeah, week left to do another inspection. Okay. And if you recall, I think last year, Tim QCAB was with me doing this training, and he talks a lot about emergency response and spill prevention, and really the intersection of MS4 program into some like hazardous waste regulations. And he asked us to include this reminder for everybody that there's a new requirement. It went into effect in 2022 with reporting due this year. For communities to register with the Massachusetts State Emergency Response Commission if you are required to do tier 2 reporting. And so that's applicable to facilities, you can see on the bottom here, that store 10,000 pounds of a hazardous chemical or 500 pounds of an extremely hazardous chemical. And that's all defined if you go to that link. So oil, fuel, diesel, salt, sand, and many more materials count towards those amounts. So if your facility in general is subject to an oil SPCC plan, tier 2 is likely applicable. So that's something we just want to give you that information and some links. And if you have questions about that, I can connect you with Tim. Just want to have it on your radar. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to advance this. Sorry, that won't work. And so for the oil spill prevention, control, and countermeasure SPCC plan that I just mentioned, it's very common as we're doing, when we're writing original SWIPs for people, we're asking questions and finding out like, oh, you also need an SPCC plan because you have combined above ground storage greater than 1,320 gallons of oil. And so that's something that needs to be updated every 5 years. There should be, I believe it's a monthly inspection related to your SPCC plan. So again, this is another thing just to remember as you're thinking about those quarterly SWIP inspections. If you also have an SPCC plan, you should have that monthly documentation of these inspections. And if you are unsure if you need one, there's a link in here to do a questionnaire to make that determination. And again, as you're thinking about, do I have that much oil on site? Oil is fairly broadly defined. So what we think of typically is petroleum-based oils on the left, diesel fuel, gasoline, etc. But then also oil containing products count, and it's also your storage capacity, not just the amount you have. And then there's even some non-petroleum based oils like animal-based oils, vegetable oil, biofuel. So it all counts towards that quantity. And covered under both the MS4 program and the SPCC requirements is spill response. It's really a very important part of your SWIPs and your good housekeeping program. This is really more of an emergency situation, so it's not going to happen often, but when it does, you need to be prepared. So working from left to right. So the first step in your spill response is providing site control. So keeping everyone on site safe, preventing people, cars, etc., from disturbing the spill area. And then you're going to contain and curtail. So stop that release from happening and begin containment. And then you're going to initiate your regulatory notifications. We have a slide about that later about who needs to be notified. But certainly if you have an SPCC plan, that's your SPCC coordinator is going to start handling this. And then notify your cleanup contractor. Again, that's your SPCC coordinator will do that. And then you're going to clean up only after you have regulatory approval. So in Massachusetts, spilled oil is a hazardous waste. So in most of these cases, your fire department is going to be involved for a hazardous waste cleanup. The other thing to mention, Cassandra talked about the different types of illicit discharges and how it's, there's all different ways to respond. An emergency spill is an illicit discharge. EPA has an expectation that you are tracking it as such, even though it's really a completely different procedure than, say, an SSO, or if you encounter sanitary wastewater at the end of a pipe. So for the annual report, when you're counting the number of illicit discharges that you identified and corrected, these would all count if you had a spill. So one thing to look at often is, are your spill kits near any of your fuel storage or your fuel pumps, and are they stocked? So anytime I'm doing a SWIP inspection, one of the first things I do is open the spill kit and make sure that it is fully stocked. If I can't see a spill kit, that really is like, it's just a huge red flag. And your spill kits can include any or all of these things. So spill mats, gloves, absorbent booms, plastic bags, goggles, and loose material. And this is just the slide that you'll have in this deck with some of the notification procedures and phone numbers, and then who to call when, right? So for the state, generally, I think 10 gallons or more, I believe, was that 2-hour notification? I didn't write that down. This is all falls under Tim's area of expertise, but yeah, you need to get on the phone with the state and federal NRC pretty quickly in a spill. Yeah, and that should all be spelled out in detail in an SPCC plan, and most likely in your SWIP as well. Okay. All right, so we are asking for more participation. So what we're going to do to shake things up with the good housekeeping is, instead of me just kind of explaining all the SOPs to you, we'll start with some questions. Again, this is all information you've most likely heard before, but so we'll ask you some questions to see if you remember, what you're supposed to be doing with the program, and then I'll explain. So open the chat. Yeah, let me open the chat. So we'll have you, same thing. We're going low tech. Just put your answers in the chat. There's no penalty for wrong answers. All right, go ahead. Now I can't read it. Here we go. Stick it there. Okay, catch basin cleaning. So first question for you. Materials from catch basin cleaning may be A, mixed with street sweepings, B, disposed of at a solid waste facility, C, added to compost, or D, stored indefinitely at the DPW yard. Okay. So we have a lot of B's coming in. Tell them, Cassandra. Okay. The answer is B. Your catch basin cleaning material should be disposed of as solid waste. The only time you'd be able to mix it with your street sweepings, you would have to have a beneficial use determination to do something different with catch basin cleanings. They are solid waste. Okay, so then, so there you go. Comment in the chat. So just some notes on catch basin cleaning. So this can be done in-house or contracted. Catch basins must be cleaned to ensure sumps are not more than 50% full. And again, I think in early iterations of the permit, EPA was specifying a number of times per year to clean catch basins, but there was pushback. So then it's more open-ended, but now you have to track the percent full. You have to ensure proper disposal or reuse according to Mass DEP policy. So you have a link here to the policy for catch basin cleanings. It is most often solid waste. For when you're out doing the catch basin cleaning, you should also conduct a visual inspection to make sure there's no maintenance issues to address, like a missing hood, check the pavement around the grate, see if make sure everything's in good working condition. You should maintain your cleaning documentation using inspection forms, and that is most typically happening at this point electronically with ArcGIS Online or PeopleGIS or a similar electronic form, either on your phone or a tablet. And then if sewage odor or evidence of an illicit discharge is present at the catch basin, it should be reported to a supervisor. Okay, go ahead. All right, next question for you all. Street sweeping. According to Mass DEP, which of the following are true about storage of street sweepings? So A, storage must be at a location such as the DPW yard that is under the control of the municipality. B, street sweepings shall be protected from wind and rain to the extent necessary to prevent dust erosion and offsite migration. C, street sweepings shall not be stored within the 100-foot buffer zone of a wetland or within wetland resource areas. D, storage of the street sweepings must be temporary. Or E, all of the above. All right, if that answer is coming in, keep them going. This is good. Everyone's picking E. E is correct. Okay. And you can go to the next slide. So in the permit, you're required to sweep all municipally owned streets and parking lots at least once per year and maintain documentation that you're doing that and ensure proper disposal or reuse according to DEP's policy. So once a year doesn't sound so bad, but in a lot of cases, there is there's an impairment or a TMDL that is requiring you in that watershed to sweep twice a year or in some way increase the frequency. So if you have a nutrient impairment or TMDL, so phosphorus or nitrogen, you are at a minimum sweeping twice, and they're specifying in Appendix H, spring and then fall after leaves have fallen off. Leaves on pavement are proving to be pretty problematic in terms of phosphorus loading. So it's really important to get those up off of the pavement. So they say between September 1st and December 1st to do that the second time. And then if you have solids, oil, grease, metals, one of those impairments or TMDLs, any drainage area with a high impervious area percentage, commercial or high density residential areas, they're looking for you to think about that and most likely increase sweeping in those areas as well. Okay. Next question. Snow stockpiling. When stockpiling snow, you should avoid these areas. A, paved areas. B, wetlands. C, stormwater BMPs. D, grass areas. E, only B and C. F, all of the above. Or G, none of the above. Let's see what we think. Anybody have a guess on this one? All right, we've got some answers coming in. Got an E, an F, another E and an F. Okay, the answer is E, only B and C. So we should be avoiding pushing any snow into wetlands and stormwater BMPs. And it's fairly common, again, if we do SWIP inspections in the spring, when snow is melting, we will, you can see where the BMPs are, and it's very often that's a place where you have space and the snow ends up going there, but then it takes all those pollutants and the sand and the trash and puts it into your stormwater BMP, and then you'll have to clean that back out. So it's a thing to probably mark that in the fall, maybe stake off where your BMPs are so the snow is not pushed all the way like right up against your BMPs. Okay. All right, next question. Floor drains. So your building floor drains are allowed to discharge to A, the storm sewer, B, oil water separator, C, wetlands, D, sanitary sewer, E, a leach field, F, a tight tank, G, only B, D, and F, or H, all of the above. Okay. We have a lot of G coming in. The answer is G. So yes, So your floor drains can be connected to an oil water separator that eventually goes to the sewer. The sanitary sewer, a tight tank is fine. It absolutely cannot go to a leach field. That becomes a groundwater pollution problem. And definitely not the environment. Go ahead. So this may seem silly, I guess, at this point in the permit program, but if you haven't truly verified where your floor drains go, it's important to do that. I guess there's been many times where we've been surprised that floor drains are actually connected to the environment or to the drainage system. In this particular case, no one thought that this was going to the environment, but it said right on the grate that it drains to a waterway, and it in fact did drain to a waterway. So that's something that becomes a corrective action and the clock starts ticking. Okay, vehicle washing question. Everybody loves to think about vehicle washing. True or false, you may wash municipal vehicles outside in the parking lot with a pressure washer or a little soap. A lot of B answers. Anybody else? Okay, go ahead, Cassandra. It is B. It is false. This is a newer fact sheet from EPA about municipal vehicle and equipment washing. So you do really need to have, if possible, a dedicated wash bay or use a commercial car wash. You can do some minimal rinsing outside, but really anything that's dislodging large amounts of sediment, oil, grease, and certainly the use of soap is prohibited outdoors where it's discharging to the environment or the drain. And so another thing in a DPW audit, or while you're doing your SWIP inspections, do look around at the pavement. I've included suds on here because there have been times where we're saying there's no vehicle washing outdoors and then there's a pile of suds. I mean, that's a giveaway that that's happening outdoors, or it's at least running out of the garage into the environment. But, if EPA or DEP are on site, they are looking for evidence of like oil staining. Do you have equipment that's leaking any kind of fuel or oil or grease? Do you have evidence of paint in the drainage system? That's something that we see fairly often, that, the crew comes back from line painting and that goes into the drain. It really does not belong in the drain. It needs to go to an interior sink. Evidence that your salt pile, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is discharging from the shed into the drainage system. That's the picture on the bottom left. And then any kind of like erosion or sand, or if your stockpiles are not protected or not really in bins very neatly, and that is running into the drain, that can be problematic. And your DPW site, or any facilities like that should be swept fairly often. I mean, what I'm hearing is every couple of weeks is a pretty typical frequency. All right, go ahead. Okay. Another question for you, dumpsters. Which of these dumpsters appear to meet EPA's expectations for pollution prevention? You can put your guesses in the chat. Got one guess. Anybody want to guess? We have two. We have a few votes for B. There is another one that I would consider good besides B. D. All right, let's give them the answer. Okay. B and C, but lids should be closed. Yes. Yes. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Yeah, so B, I think I explained this on the next page, but yeah, go ahead. Yes, your dumpster should be in good condition, without holes, covered, away from catch basins or wetlands and waters if possible. I do think a lot of times the dumpster is at like a low point for some reason, right next to a catch basin. It just seems like that's where they're placed. So it becomes even more important to make sure that they are covered and intact, which I know can be difficult. We did have an EPA audit where they pointed out this particular dumpster that you see on the page having a lot of holes in it. Then you're forced to talk to the vendor about getting a new rental dumpster, and it's just hard to find a lot of dumpsters that are in perfect condition. All right, salt sheds. Next question. All right, so for the top question, true or false, salt storage may be uncovered in Massachusetts if outside of a water supply protection area. A is true and B is false. Okay, I've got one guess. Another one. Give people another moment. Okay, so that is false. So there are additional salt pile restrictions in water supply protection areas under 310 CMR 22. So I think it's safe drinking water in Massachusetts, but EPA also requires all salt piles to be covered. I think it was due in permit year 1 under the MS4 program. Okay, so the second question, components of an environmentally friendly roadway de-icing salt storage facility include, so I will let you all read that list. So we've got A through E or F, all of the above. Okay, got some answers coming in. Got a lot of F's. Okay, Cassandra. It is F, all of the above. All right, you can go next. So for salt sheds, so on the left, this salt shed looks really nice from the front. And if you click one more time, when we walked around the whole perimeter of this salt shed, although it looked good, everything's covered and it was pushed back, it was actually being pushed too high and too far back against the wall, and the salt was actually weeping under and through the back wall. So that's a case where you need to make sure it's not being piled too high and tight to the walls. And then the top right, I think you can click that one more time. It's important to keep, if you don't have some sort of, most don't have doors, but make sure you're not piling the salt too close to the edge. You want to keep salt behind your drip line. It'll be obvious in the rain. If you are too close to the drip line, you'll see the salt migrating, and then sweep your loading and unloading area fairly frequently, especially during the winter time when you're using it. Okay. Yeah, does anyone have any questions about all of that good housekeeping before I move on to the last bit? What else up? Don't see anything in the chat. I don't see any hands raised, so I guess we'll keep going. Okay, next up, we're just going to give you. Oh wait, hold on. How about salt piles for residents?
Like smaller quantities.
Smaller quantities. So to me, I think it partly falls outside of your purview under MS4 in terms of good housekeeping, but it is an educational issue. So I think where, maybe, well, especially for like commercial areas, or certain residents or like large condos, it's worth doing some education on how much they should be using. And I mean, I do see that's where there is a lot of excessive salt use in some of those, like, I'm thinking like community colleges or strip malls or things like that. So it's definitely education. And then I think if you're subject to like a chloride TMDL, there could be more stringent requirements to get a handle on that, like private salt use.
And what if there's like a resident pickup for salts, the recommended, like if it's at DPW?
Oh, hang on.
Would that be covered? Yeah.
Say it again. Oh, if it's at the DPW, oh, like oh, I know what you're saying now. I was gonna say, feel free to unmute and correct me, but so that, I'm trying to think of the ones I've seen. I mean, I do think if you can, I think it should be covered. I don't think EPA specifies like a size of
Quantity
pile.
limit.
Yeah. I think any salt pile should be covered. Okay, all right. Okay. Okay. All right, now we'll keep going. All right, annual report preview, just because September 28th is right around the corner in my mind. Okay, so starting on this page, a lot of this is the same that it's been for years past. So you're going to continue to fill this out as normal, and hopefully these programs are at sort of a steady state and it's becoming a habit. But your public education and outreach, you're going to provide an update. Public participation is still an annual requirement to report on that, and giving the public an opportunity to weigh in on your stormwater management program and any updates in the plan. IDDE program, again, same with the training, the SSO inventory, your updates to your inventory and priority ranking. So if you are doing catchment investigations and you have found new outfalls or decided some outfalls are not actually MS4 outfalls, any of those updates should be included with your annual report, including an updated prioritization. Is it high or low priority, and what is its receiving water, and is there an associated TMDL or an impairment? So that is important to keep those updates in the report. And then for catchment investigations, you are reporting on that. EPA is typically asking what catchments are complete, like a number in percent, right? Yeah. So complete kind of goes back to Cassandra's examples. If you have anything left undone, like if you did the key junction manhole inspections, but it has a system vulnerability factor, but you didn't do the wet weather screening, it would not be complete yet. So that's okay. There's no, we're not at the timeline to finish all that is by year 10, but I just wouldn't count some of those as complete at this point. Under MCM4 and MCM5, EPA is expecting that there's more oversight happening with permitting. There were, local code updates that were due in a previous year, so tracking should be improving under those programs. That's really those two. Under MCM5, reviewing as-built drawings, I believe EPA has been asking for a number of as-builts. So again, as those projects are coming in that trigger your stormwater bylaw, particularly for projects over an acre, you should be keeping a tally of that. Under MCM6, so for your municipal good housekeeping, this is still the same. So storing and disposing of your catch basin cleanings, and you're certifying that you are going to report your number of catch basins cleaned and inspected. If you're reporting a number, you should have documentation to back that up, even though you're not submitting it necessarily. I skipped one under 5. So for your retrofits, you're going to report on any progress made with your retrofit inventory and implementation of those BMPs. If you've actually constructed some of the BMPs on your priority list, you are filling in that list of 5. So you're always going to have 5 BMPs in the queue that could be built. We talked about number of SWIP inspections already. Typically, EPA is asking about any corrective actions noted in your SWIP inspections. And then BMP inspections is one that's been tricky, I think, for most communities. I think the expectation in the permit is that you're looking at all of your stormwater BMPs once a year. If that number is large, or if they are, particularly if they're proprietary BMPs and not detention ponds, that becomes really a monumental task in and of itself just to do the inspections. So I think whatever your capacity has been for BMP inspections, report what you've done, and then continue to prioritize that work year after year. and then track what you're doing when you see BMPs that are in need of maintenance or rehabilitation. Track what you have done to follow up on those inspections. Okay, and for new permittees on the left here, so completing your IDDE ordinance is due. Completing your construction, or actually both ordinances or bylaws. So IDDE and then the construction and post-construction. Developing the written IDDE plan. Your IDDE plan should include written catchment investigation procedures. Yeah, and that's not it.
Yeah, and then it's the other annual requirements. It's a little bit pared
Yeah.
down from 2003 permittees, but
Right. Okay, and then for the impaired waters and TMDLs, so everyone has some seasonal messaging if you have a nutrient impairment that you're supposed to be disseminating to different audiences. You should be tracking or estimating your BMP nutrient removal. So if you have a municipally owned stormwater BMP, having an inventory of how much pollution is being removed by that BMP. If you don't know, then you don't know. It's okay to say that you don't have that math done, but just keep that in the list. And then completing lake and pond phosphorus control plans or other phosphorus, nobody's Charles over here, but it's just the lakes and ponds. And then looking ahead to year 6, one of the bigger requirements is installing a demonstration BMP if you don't have a BMP that already counts towards that requirement.
and that's for the nutrient related
Yes.
impaired waters and TMDLs, not just the
Not everyone.
retrofit. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so with that, turn it back over to Daniela to see if there's any additional questions.
Thank you so much, Emily and Cassandra. That was great. Yeah, I think we'll open the floor now for any additional questions, outstanding thoughts or comments that folks might have. So feel free to unmute or type anything in the chat and we can go from there. We have a shy group. Or you did such a fantastic job and it was so clear. So you have both Emily's and Cassandra's information, so feel free to reach out if you come up with any questions later in the day, or as you know, you're digesting all this information. We'll be happy to answer. Also, please feel free to contact me with any additional information. I guess I'll take the time now to sort of talk about some next steps for the collaborative as we're starting to go into the summer and take our summer recess. So we'll reconvene back in the fall and continue with our regular workshops. I will send out a poll for meeting topics and sort of just general collaborative needs for the types of assistance that you might be needing from us. We are hoping to transition back to in-person meetings. I think today was a special exception since it was, we wanted to make sure that this training was available for all folks, even if they couldn't attend virtually live. So we wanted to record this and make this available online. But we'll be, yes, transitioning back to in-person to really encourage more of this collaborative, more of a collaborative, which is, it's in the name. And yeah, we're really hoping to stay true to that. And I think it'll be a great opportunity for networking and peer-to-peer learning and best practice sharing in that way as well. So more to come on that. I will be sending out that needs and desired topics poll early next week. And other than that, last opportunity for any questions before we wrap up. Okay, well, seeing none, I'd like to thank Emily and Cassandra one more time. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. And for the training, we'll have a recording of the training available shortly online and on YouTube, NEMCOG's YouTube account, as well as our website. So be on the lookout for that, and I'll be sure to email it out as well.
And we'll send you, Danielle, a copy of the slides too, so everybody has the links that we had shared in the slides.
Excellent. Yes, we'll share that out as well. So be on the lookout for all those resources, and have a great summer, and we'll all be in touch soon. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.